Okay. I'm just getting up for the day. I had a good restful sleep last night. A very, very long sleep last night. And I'm just getting up and yeah, we know that a lot of things have occurred yesterday and have been occurring recently in general. Oh yeah, the thumbnail I picked. That's the aftermath of my vehicle. I was actually hit inside of the first time. That's what the fire did to it after it sat there as a burning hulk of metal due to the accelerant that was on top of the mines that we ran over. Likely a white phosphorus mortar round, like a Willie Pete mortar, a WP mortar. That's what lit the engine block on fire, causing it to spread, cook off all the ammo, and we all got out alive before it got that bad. So everybody's good aside from the brain damage and everything else. We all suffer from it, but yeah, that's the aftermath of the vehicle. Now I actually also have the vehicle as it's burning in the actual middle of the battle that I described in the last stream it was that I did before this one. I may use that one as the next thumbnail for tomorrow's show or something. But anyways, the title of this has as much to do with what happened yesterday as it does with other types of issues. Now, I was going to also state this. Look, my channel was always intended to be a channel where I conduct my work, and it's not a channel for people to come to talk about other things. I'll just put it. So I'm asking very nicely to not do that. All right. If anybody has anything that they want to say about the work, or questions they want to ask or talk about topics relating to the work I do here, then that's all good and well. That's welcomed. That's very welcomed. I mean, you are more than welcome to do that. But if it involves any other types of issues, uh, keep it off this channel. Keep it off this channel. I don't have nothing to do with it. All right. I don't have anything to do with it, and I won't have anything to do with it. And if anybody hears this and does that again, then they're gone. I have no choice but to remove you because I'm not going to entertain that type of garbage on this channel. Not now, not ever. So consider this a warning, and I'm not directing this at anybody in particular. I'm directing this at everybody who comes here. Do not do that on my channel. Period. Do not do that here. So, yeah, this is not a drama channel for anybody. But anyways, I think that the whole thing with the guide stones yesterday, you're going to see a lot of people jumping to conclusions about it or the reasons behind it. And, here we go. I'm waking up for the day. I go and look at the, what do you call that? Your feed, your video feed of all the subscriptions you have, and sure enough, every single solitary video has to do with that, and it has to do with oh well, 9/11 happened at this time, and oh, look at the number of days between when it was built and when it happened. All this stuff, all of it. And it's okay to speculate, but I think a lot of people don't understand that speculation is just that. It's just speculation. It's not necessarily grounded in or based in any sort of fact. You can speculate, but without established facts, That's all it is. It's speculation. You know, why do people think that I made the community post I made yesterday and put in the actual pinned comment to use as a metric for making your own choices? Use established facts to either uh, accept or refute things that that you see that occur in real life. You have to use established facts and figures, numbers, stats, all of that stuff. You have to use that. Oh, and capabilities, of course, because if you see certain things happening in like the military sphere or threats being made in the military sphere, you have to look at the actual capabilities. What are they capable of doing and not doing to be able to accept or refute that? Because there are established facts and capabilities as well. Like I saw something that was really funny. It was how NATO's going to get like 300,000 troops together to for a war with Russia. It's like, wow, man, are you serious? Are you joking? Do people not understand the amount of time it would take to get all that together? Even if they had, look, even if Europe was not totally being strangled to death as far as like their resources are concerned, which naturally affects military logistics. Even if they weren't being strangled like that, let's say that they did have the ability to get a force like that together, to put a force like that together. It would take them about a year to do that now. A whole year. It would take them a year to do that. And that's if all their logistics were in order. You can't, it's like the whole 100,000 man, or I'm sorry, the 1 million man army they were going to put together in Ukraine. And people just take all this shit at face value with no evidence for it. None. No evidence. They just take what's being said at face value. Do they have a genie that grants them wishes? Do they just wish it and it becomes so? Your wish is my command. Oh, here's your 1 million man army in Ukraine. Oh, you wish for 300,000 troops to be ready to go to war with Russia. Oh, your wish is my command. Here's your 300,000 troops. I mean, you have to think about it. I mean, really think about it. All right. When they put that force together, and I'm talking about just the Western forces that were involved in Operation Desert Storm, when Desert Shield was going on, the Western forces were about, 500,000 big, roughly. I'm not talking about the Pan-Arab forces. I'm not talking about the Syrians, who also technically contributed to all the Allied forces in Desert Storm, or Desert Shield, rather. Because Syria in the first Gulf War was one of the allies, and they contributed their military as part of the Allied forces, the total Allied forces. So just to put together the 500 or so thousand odd Western forces, it took about a year. It took them about a good year. So we're talking like for 300,000 NATO troops in the current state of affairs to bring up, okay, because understand this, these active militaries of the European NATO members, they're puny. They're puny. I mean, like, you could fit the whole British military in several Chinook helicopters. They're so puny. I mean, I'm exaggerating. I'm obviously exaggerating with that, but you get the idea. I mean, the whole entire British military is like, it's like 60 something thousand troops. That's their active military. I'm talking about the forces that are active, that are already available without calling up reserves. They do not have these big military forces. They don't have it. They do not have it. They have reserves, but all in all, if you combine reserves with their active forces, they're 70, they're high 60s, 70s, whatever thousand many it is. It's not they're not big. They're not big. They are not big. You call forward these active forces and combine them all together. You're literally at that point to assemble 300,000 together on a whim. You are literally taking nearly all the forces they even have that are active, and you're cobbling them all together, and you're just throwing them, to the front lines where you anticipate that you're going to have some sort of a conflict. You're literally taking what they have, and as far as we're concerned, we have this shrinking woke military that are they have a crisis of in terms of retention. By retention, I mean retaining the forces they do have, and because recruiting is horrible. They have a recruiting crisis too, and they can't retain people because of their policies. People want to get out now. It's demoralized. It's woke. It's the standards are so low that they're literally letting in anyone. They're letting in anybody. These are the lowest the standards have ever been because retention and recruiting is horrible. And they're talking about conducting more purges. Is it wise to conduct purges at a time when you have a very, very, very powerful adversary in Russia, as far as Russia, who could stomp you like an ant? And then you have China, the most powerful nation the world has ever known. At this point, they are the most powerful nation the world has ever seen and known. Since about 2018, they've been the world superpower, and they still are growing. They're still growing. We lost every single solitary war simulation ever conducted against China, just China. We also lose exercises against Russia that we cobble together, as far as like NATO exercises. So we can't beat the number two most powerful nation on earth. The entire NATO alliance combined cannot beat them. Then you have the world superpower, China, who's vastly more powerful than Russia is conventionally. And their technology and Russia's technology are the same, but China has a lot more of it. So, I mean, really, when you couple Russia and China together, how is anybody going to defeat them? They don't even need the rest of the world. Even China alone doesn't need the rest of the world. They could crush us. So, I mean, you have, hey, Ken, great to see you. You have, hey, Shadow Mask. Yeah, you have all these things in the news that the West is going to do this and do that. And look, it's not the 1990s. It's not the 80s during the Cold War at the height, the peak of the Cold War in the early 80s. It's not the 80s. It's not the 90s with the Gulf War. The West can't just put together these armies out of nothing. They just can't. They can't. They don't have it. The logistics are not in order for them to be able to do such a thing. It's impossible. Hey Heather, good to see you. Welcome. Yeah, they're just not able to put these armies together like they used to during the peak of the Cold War, or like they could during the 90s in the first Gulf War, or likewise like they did to invade Iraq, in 2003. They just can't cobble these international armies together on a whim. They don't have the logistics in order. They don't have the personnel required to uphold all the obligations they already have to uphold around the world, and to be able to cobble together a new army of some 300,000. Where are they going to come from? Where are those troops going to come from? How are they going to do it? How much how much fuel is it going to cost for them to do it? How much food is it going to cost for them to do it? How much clean water, bottled water? How much ammunition are they going to have to transport to their pre-positioning points, their depots that are pre-positioned near any sort of a front line? How many new fobs are they going to have to build, and how much will it cost? How much materials are they going to need to build it? How many plumbers and electricians and different types of engineers and construction companies are they going to need to establish these places? See, people aren't thinking about these things. They're not thinking about it. They just see something is said in the news like, oh, there's going to be a 1 million man Ukraine army. Oh, okay, so what? They're going to grab all the grandpas and turn them into the geriatric brigades? I mean, really? I mean, think about it. When people read these news articles about, things that are being proposed as far as like Western armies and or Ukraine or whatever, when people are reading these things, do they not ever think about these aspects of it? This is what I'm talking about when I'm saying that people have to use established facts to either refute or corroborate, if something even can be corroborated, to either refute or corroborate these stories that are coming out in the news, because people aren't thinking about established facts. They don't have a genie that they can just wish for all these things and they just pop out of nowhere. They just come true out of nowhere. Oh, yeah, well, we wish for all these pre-positioned ammo dumps and forward operating bases, and we wish for our 300,000 man expeditionary force that we're going to put along the NATO frontiers. Because as of right now, NATO is basically at the point where they have what they've done, or what they were able to actually do, rather, is they were able to cobble together some, what was it, like 12 battalions, 12 like crisis reaction battalions, or whatever they call, or because the Germans actually do have one battalion called the crisis reaction forces in their military. So I think NATO has something to similar effect, where they've cobbled together some 12 battalions, which 12 battalions, that's like a little bigger than a brigade. It's closer to like maybe a division. That's like one, almost a division. It's almost a full division. 12 battalions. So they cobbled together some 12 battalions or something to this effect. It was no bigger than 12 battalions that they've put along the NATO frontiers as like an emergency or crisis reaction type of a force, so that if Russia did decide to invade NATO, that was what they would have to stand against it. But you got to understand that that's spread along the entire frontiers of NATO. That's the whole 800 or so miles of frontier in NATO, and that's not counting. If Finland joins, then that's even more mileage of frontier that they have to cover. But for right now, NATO is covering on its frontiers with these little emergency, crisis reaction battalions, which the entire Russian military is vastly bigger. Oh yeah, Armored Saint. Yeah, that's NATO's like quick reaction forces. That's their QRF. Like their QRF forces are these like 12 emergency crisis reaction battalions, or whatever they called them. I can't remember the specific name, but it was something to that effect. And I read about it, and that's all that they really have there. That's all they have that can react like at short notice to some sort of Russian provocations, and that's smaller. That's smaller than a full division, and that's spread along the entire NATO frontier. These 12 or so battalions, these 10 to 12 battalions. It was at least 10, but it was no bigger than 12. I know it was either 10 or 12. It's been a long time since I've read that story. That was months ago. So I'm assuming that this 300,000 that they're now, wishing that they had, they're wishing for it, but that doesn't mean that their little genie can grant them their wish, because they don't have a genie. So what they have is these tiny little battalion-sized forces that can serve as their QRF, which would hopefully buy them. See, this is their thinking. This is not me saying this. This is NATO's thinking. This is how NATO thinks, okay? That can buy them time so that they can hurry and do their mobilize reserves, and then maybe do a draft of some sort in Europe to where these European NATO contributors can like do a general mobilization of their populations. But by that time, it's going to be too late. They don't understand that hybrid warfare will be used against them too. There are large Russian communities throughout Western Europe. There's a huge Russian expatriate community in Berlin alone. Now imagine if a lot of those were like actual troops from Russian military units, which I'm pretty convinced that they are. Now they could seize Berlin, which is the capital of Germany. They could seize that place before, they would even know what hit them. And then you would have them, of course, going after all the NATO bases and everything else in an actual war scenario. So, yeah, that's what I'm saying, Armored Saint. Yeah, they don't have it. They don't have it. They can't put together an army like that on such short notice with the logistics, with all of that. Because that's what I was saying earlier. When I think a little bit before you came in, I was bashing them. I was bashing them for saying that they could just put together some army like that on such short notice with the logistics, with the ability to, build these fobs and pre-position ammo dumps and do all this. I know it's pretty funny, ain't it, Armored Saint? It's hilarious. I mean, like when people read these stories, they think that NATO can do these things just because it's in print. But that is more of a testament not to the military power of NATO, because NATO's weaker than it's ever been, but it's a testament to NATO's ability to produce psyop products that convince people of things that aren't even true or couldn't possibly be true, like the ability to just on short notice, be able to raise up these armies and do all these things. That's a testament to NATO's psychological operations abilities more than it's a testament to actual NATO military power. The same way that NATO has bashed Russia, when in fact, Russia has accomplished incredible feats with a tiny force. 70 battalions of Russian troops went inside of Ukraine, and inside within the borders of that country, they were locally outnumbered by 650,000 total Ukraine forces of their active, reserve, and paramilitary forces all combined together. That equaled about 650,000 forces that Ukraine had to go up against Russia's tiny little incursion forces they sent in. So Russia was outnumbered in just the local area, not completely, because when you talk about completely, the Russian army is vastly bigger than the Ukrainian forces. But what they sent into Ukraine was outnumbered inside Ukraine itself by a factor of 10 to 1. The Russian incursion forces were outnumbered 10 to 1 by the Ukrainian forces. And they ground the Ukrainian forces down to the nub. They ground them down to the nub. So now you see, yeah, they are, Armored Saint. They are. They're living a fantasy. They're living in some fairy tales. It's fantasy fairy tales. Their psyops don't match the reality. They don't match the reality on the ground. The psyops of NATO and the United States does not match the reality on the ground. So then you have NATO with Russia's 70 or so odd battalions that have ground down the whole Ukraine forces that outnumbered it 10 to 1 inside Ukraine itself. With those 70 battalions, they ground the entire Ukraine forces down to the nub, to where it's old men, and now it's Western equipment, mishmashed Western equipment that has been sent in there, when the Ukrainians started out with drastically more heavy equipment than the West can replace. And all of that stuff was destroyed by Russia. So if Russia destroyed 1,800 tanks of Ukraine's, and NATO can't replace the tanks, okay? They really can't. They can't. They cannot replace all the tank losses. So if nearly all of the 1,800 Ukrainian tanks were destroyed by Russia, by their only tiny little 70 battalions they sent in, then what is NATO's 12 battalions or so along the frontier? What do they hope to do? Like what do they hope to do? What do they think they can stop? What I mean, do they think that their little rinky-dink 12 battalions in the Baltic states and in Poland and Hungary and or I'm sorry, Slovakia, Hungary and Romania, do they think their little 12 spread out battalions are going to be anything more than a road bump? Do they think they're going to be anything more than a road bump? Well, yeah, the one world government's not going to be a Western government, Heather. It's going to be an Eastern government. It'll be a Chinese communistic government around the world because China is the world's superpower. The United States and NATO and the Western elites with it are going to be destroyed. They will not have their great reset. There will be something else that takes its place, and it'll be called the Beast Kingdom. It'll be the 10 Eastern victorious kings of World War III that have defeated the West in World War III. The 10 Eastern kings, led predominantly by China and also by Russia, the other 8 kings will be allied kings of other Eastern nations that have aligned themselves with China and Russia. Okay, so stick with me here. What's going to happen, again, as I always explain, is that the Chinese and Russian coalition of the willing that they put together, which will be the Chinese and the Russians and their allies like Pakistan, North Korea, Iran, Syria, of course, because they helped Syria during their internal conflict. They'll use Syria as an ally too, because Syria and Iran have always been thick as thieves, and Russia as well has been thick with Syria and helped Assad to win his civil war. So they'll use Syria in the Middle East, I'm sure, but Syria is not strong enough to do anything beyond anything in their local area after the long civil war they had. But, you're going to have very powerful other kings like Pakistan. Pakistan has a big, big military. It's not as big as Russia's, and it's damn sure not as big as China's, but it's pretty damn big. Then you have Iran, then you have North Korea. North Korea is pretty damn big too. It's again not as big as Russia, but it's pretty big. Then you're going to have, their other allies. You might have some CSTO nation states like Belarus or Kazakhstan, and other CSTO members that are thick with Russia that'll join in. You're going to have Latin American nations that have aligned themselves with China and Russia, like Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba. That are very, very tight with China and with Russia. So look. You're going to have your 10 Eastern kings, okay? And what's going to happen is the United States and its European allies, along with Australia and New Zealand, all the Five Eyes countries, basically. Every English-speaking country is going to be annihilated, along with Western Europe, too. And anyone who aligns themselves with the West is going to be destroyed in World War III. They will be destroyed. So what's going to happen is you're going to have no, Okie. They're not. It's not going to be like that. It's that the UN. The UN's not going to be running things in the United States. What's going to happen is they might get used. They might get used in some sort of a capacity, but China has subverted the UN to do their purposes. So what's going to happen is there's going to be a new UN after World War III. It'll be reconstituted. It'll be an Eastern centric UN. The UN as it exists now will no longer exist. That's headquartered in New York City. No, that's going to be gone because Babylon's going to be destroyed, and that includes New York. The UN that as it exists there. The Chinese and Russians don't take orders from the UN. The UN takes orders from China and also Russia, and it's been subverted. So what's going to happen is there's not going to be this UN anymore. The Chinese and Russians are going to invade for their own purposes. They're not invading for the UN's purposes. They're invading for their own purposes to colonize the United States for China and for Russia. Russia will get the northern parts that they've always wanted. They wanted Alaska back. They want northern Canada so that they can rule the entire Arctic Circle with all its resources. Russia wants to become the resource superpower, while China will be the world superpower as far as like its military and everything. But Russia wants to be the resource superpower. They want everybody coming to them for commodities. So China and Russia together with both of their nuclear arsenals and both of their militaries combined, nobody in the world can challenge them and the resources of Russia and the factories of China. Nobody can challenge those two combined. Nobody can even touch them. Nobody can scratch the surface of the might and power that is China combined with Russia. Because China's factories can go nonstop, especially with Russian resources at their disposal. So you have to look at it like that. China has the military size that's vast enough, that's gargantuan enough between their military and paramilitary that nobody can defeat the Chinese on the battlefield. Nobody can defeat China on the battlefield. And Russia's military is pretty damn strong too. It's the second most powerful after China's military. Now Russia has the biggest nuke arsenal, the biggest and most powerful nuke arsenal, but China, even though their nuke arsenal's third in size, it's the second most powerful because even though ours is the second in size, all of China's nukes actually work. They're all new. And they have hypersonic delivery, missile cloaking abilities for their missiles. They can cloak their missiles. They have hypersonic weapons, and all of China's nukes are new. So all of China's 1,000 nukes are going to work. So that makes China, along with China's industrial might, their gold holdings, the sheer gargantuan size of their economy and industrial output, along with the behemoth of their military and paramilitary size, along with their nuke arsenal, even though it's the third biggest, it all works and it's all highly effective. That makes China the most powerful nation on Earth. They don't have to have the biggest nuclear arsenal to still be the most powerful nation on Earth. As long as all their nukes work, guess what? 1,000 nukes is enough to destroy two huge nations. Get the job done, if you know what I mean. So if they can get the job done with their nuclear arsenal, combined with their gargantuan military and paramilitary sizes, they don't have to have the biggest nuclear arsenal to be the world superpower because they're number one in everything else. So as long as all their nukes actually work, they're still the world superpower, with Russia being the second, because Russia does have the commodities and they do have the biggest nuke arsenal. But China has the military might to get it done and to take over the world if they wanted to. If they really wanted to, China could take over the entire world by themselves. So, yeah, China and Russia together are unbeatable. They're unbeatable. And the West will never recognize it until it's too late, until there's Chinese and Russian troops on our soil taking things over. Oh, wait, they already are on our soil. They're in CCP properties. And they're surrounding us, too, in Canada, Mexico, Panama Canal Zone, Nicaragua, Cuba, Venezuela. They're all over. Bahamas, too. They're everywhere. There's Chinese and Russian troops ringing this entire nation. In Canada, they're inside on CCP properties. Their fourth generation, also called hybrid war doctrines, they have been set up. We have been set up to be taken down via their new hybrid warfare doctrines. That's how it works. They invade from inside and out at the same time when they're ready to take over. That's how it's going to go. Inside and outside simultaneously. All the forces that are outside ringing this nation, they're going to come in as the heavy-handed reinforcements for the Trojans that are already inside doing the heavy lifting. If you watch my documentary series, both the 96-hour invasion playlist, which is 36 videos long. It's just under 2 hours long in total. The whole thing. And then you watch the 10 videos that are in my Northwest playlist, my Pacific Northwest, which goes with that. That's another 1 hour. So all in all, you're looking at just under 3 hours of watching those two documentary playlists, which show how hybrid warfare works. 100%. It shows how it works. If you recognize all the patterns that are going on in those battles, then you see the same thing. They get their muster signal. The Trojans get their muster signal. Then the anti-satellite weapons and the cyber attack takes down our eyes and ears. They take our satellites down to blind us. They take down our communications to make us deaf and unable to communicate. Then the Club Ks all fire off that they've snuck in and start hitting key targets everywhere across the land from all sides of the land. Then you have while that's all happening, you already had the Trojans leaving, and they're starting to capture cities and then also set up key logistical points from their CCP regime properties that are right along main invasion routes. Like you might have a farm that's along I-35, and they start bringing the supplies out of the barns and setting them up alongside the highway and setting up signs so that all the units that are rolling in from Mexico can see where they need to pull in for gas and for more food and for more ammo so that they can keep on trucking and keep heading inland before they fan out and act as heavy-handed reinforcements for the Trojans that are in other parts of being deep inland that are already capturing key cities and other places. That's how a hybrid warfare works. That's the entire doctrine. It's inside and outside invasion simultaneously with new key innovative technologies used to supplement it. And it's a doctrine we have no defense for. We have no defense, zero defenses for it. So the whole West is going to be invaded that way. It's not just going to be the United States. It's going to be Europe. It's going to be everywhere that'll be invaded by China and Russia. And don't forget, China has troops inside Europe too. China has forces in Serbia and probably other countries in Europe, I would imagine. But Chinese troops are all over the world because they're going to help Russia take over Europe. Russia's going to return the favor by helping China to take over America, and so on and so forth. They have a good neighbor, good buddy policy. You know, they scratch each other's backs. They help each other. So, yeah, that's, you couldn't ask for a better friend than that when it comes to an ally. You couldn't ask for a better friend than that, having an ally like Russia, who will give you food when you need it, who will give you cheap oil when you need it, who will give you plenty of nickel and copper and coal and iron ore, and then in return, China gives them finished goods and helps them out with their defense needs in some aspects. You know, you couldn't ask for a better friend than China and Russia are to each other. So, yeah, they're going to destroy the West. So it's not going to be something that America even has a chance in. So I don't know why people are so hung up on these bogus stories about what the West thinks it's going to do, what it thinks it's going to do, and versus what it really can do are two entirely different things. While the West is going to have a hell of a time after it purged its militaries, because the Europeans purged their own militaries too. It's not just an American thing. While the West has purged its militaries and is going to have the hardest time coming up with 300,000 troops, the Chinese and the Russians have millions, especially China. China has tens of millions, literally. They have nearly 30 million. So they do have tens of millions, plural, because it's 29 million, almost 30 million, between their humongous paramilitary and their big reserves and their already sizable 4 million man active duty military, which is still the biggest active duty military on the earth at 4 million, between their Air Force, their Army, their Navy, and their strategic missile forces. That's their 4 million number. Then they've got 5 million reserves for their Army, for their PLA. Then they have their 20 million man gargantuan paramilitary forces. Nobody can defeat China on the battlefield. It's impossible. You cannot beat a military and a paramilitary force and a combined total armed forces of that immense size. And with all the vehicles, munitions, with the industrial base behind it to back it up, to keep producing spare parts, to produce new vehicles, to replace any that might have been damaged or destroyed beyond repair, to produce more and more and more and more and more munitions. You cannot defeat a nation of their vast size. You can't beat China. Nobody can defeat China. Nobody can beat really Russia either, minus China, but China and Russia are best friends, so they're not going to fight each other. But here's a testament to how powerful China is. Even when China was not regarded as a superpower back during the Cold War, even when China was only considered a large power but not a superpower in quotes, even the Soviet Union was scared of China. They did not want to be in an all-out war with China because they neighbored them. They were neighbors, meaning that China could have millions upon millions upon millions of people, troops, flooding across the borders. They were scared of that. The Soviet Union was. Even Nikita Khrushchev said during the very short and small, relatively small border conflict over the islands in the Amur, Ussuri rivers there, on the border between Manchuria and Siberia, Nikita Khrushchev was so scared of China, he said that if the Chinese cross in force, meaning if they come over into Siberia in humongous numbers, he said that they would have to use nukes to stop them because China is so huge. They're so huge. And that was back when China wasn't even considered a superpower like they are now. China is the most powerful nation on earth now. After everything that they've gotten in the 90s that they needed to become the most powerful war industry, to become the most powerful economy, to become the most powerful military. Everything they've acquired in the 90s allowed them to build up to where they are now. They've already been a pretty big industrial power. They've already had a big military in the past. But now, they're at the point they're at where they are the world superpower and they have surpassed everybody in every category. I mean, virtually. They don't have the most nukes yet, but you know what? All the nukes they do have work. And it's enough to destroy two humongous nations. So China ain't worried about nobody. And plus, Russia's their best friend anyway. So they're damn sure not worried about us. They don't have to watch a whole bunch of different fronts, because they have plenty of friends and allies in that region. China does. So China is concerned now about destroying the West, primarily destroying the West. That's China's chief concern. And also Russia's, because we've become a thorn in the side of Russia. And that is what drove China and Russia into becoming the best friends that they are today. They've always been close. They've always done the military exercises together, like Zapad and other types of exercises. They've always done military exercises. So they've always been military allies since at least the 90s. And even before that, in the Cold War, before they had some, chilly relations during the Sino-Soviet split, but even that, could have been exaggerated. Maybe it was just very small, tiny diplomatic misunderstandings that were perceived by the West as being something that were bigger than what they actually were. But after the 90s, China and Russia had become very close friends indeed, because they have seen that their future lay together, because China needed the resources of Russia and Russia needed the goods of China and even the protection of China, because when after the Soviet Union had collapsed and Russia was in a very, very weak position, China didn't do anything to them. China didn't hurt Russia. They didn't kick Russia while they were down, but the West did. The West did. The West is the ones that promoted the whole oligarch system of the criminal oligarchs, not the political oligarchs that rule today, but the criminal oligarchs that sold Russia bit by bit to the West. That was promoted by the Western elites, and the Russians have never forgot that. So when they look at their past in the 90s, which were a very hard time for Russia coming out of the Soviet Union collapse, guess what? Guess what? When they look at China, they see a friend in China because China did not kick them while they were down like the West did. China just sat there and helped them to come out of their funk. If anything, they helped to get them out of the little funk they were in, the little rut they were in. But they didn't kick them while they were down. China didn't send troops in there and start seizing parts of Siberia and saying, "Oh well, we're going to take Siberia since you guys, you guys are totally falling apart here. You guys are falling apart at the seams. We're just going to come in here and take parts of Siberia." Because China actually did have some territorial claims as it relates to, the area that Vladivostok, the port of Vladivostok, if you look at a map of Russia, the area where Vladivostok is actually used to be a part of Greater Manchuria back in the day. Back before Russia ever expanded into that region. It used to actually be a part of China. But China never kicked Russia while they were down in the 90s. They never went in there and said, "Oh, well, we're going to take Vladivostok. We're going to take this whole region here. We're going to take it from you guys since you guys are collapsed. You guys don't matter." No, China never did that to Russia. And Russia remembers that China extended them some goodwill and friendship in their hardest times. So, being that the West has always bullied Russia, especially after their collapse, Russia never forgot that either. So, Russia and China have become the best friends and best allies that they are today because of events in the 90s. But during the 90s, China's elites played our elites of the West skillfully well. China took advantage of us and our system to build themselves up during the 90s while Russia was trying to get back on its feet. China was using us and taking advantage of us and doing things to get us to deindustrialize and send our factories to China so that they could steal all our trade secrets to build their own more efficient factories. To build their industries up. And they did that. China has always hated us. They've hated us. When Nixon shook hands during the détente period with China, when he shook hands with the Chinese, he was making a deal with the devil. He was making a deal with the devil. That was back when Mao Zedong had passed away and Zhou Enlai had taken Mao Zedong's place. And Zhou Enlai had said that, he wanted to befriend the West to see what he could get from them, to see what kind of concessions, the key word being concessions, he could get from the West. He didn't care about the West. He wanted what the West had as far as technologies and ways to advance China and to build China up. He wasn't interested in their conspiracies or their reset that they were going to have later down the road in the future. No, he didn't give a damn about none of that. All he cared about, and all every Chinese leader has ever cared about, was building China into a world superpower, and they have achieved such. China is now the most powerful nation on earth, and they're getting ready to finish us off once and for all because they see America as their godsend. It's a godsend for the CCP regime. It's literally their saving grace. They see us as their saving grace because of all our resources, our arable farmland that they want to use to feed their people. The CCP will do anything to stay in power. They do not give a rat's ass about the West and its elites. All they care about is themselves and their own power, meaning that they don't want their people revolting against them and overthrowing them due to a general lack of food and resources. No. So when they look over at us and they know that they're going to have a crisis feeding their people one day. Even though Russia provides them with a lot of food, they would still like to have food independence. And food independence means that they want to take us over with all our arable farmland, colonize it, and use it for their own gains. So it's not about the UN. It's not about none of that. China has subverted the UN, but China has plans to colonize us for its own gains. They're going to colonize us for their own gains, for all the resources we have in the lower 48, because remember, Russia's going to get all the northern territories. China wants the lower 48 and the rump state of Canada. So China can, because Canada does have the ability to produce a lot of grains in the like Saskatchewan, Manitoba, all those other areas. So what's going to happen is that you're going to have China taking the rump state of Canada, basically the provinces, because in the northern part they're called territories, like Northwest Territories, Nunavut Territories, Yukon Territories. That's all going to go to Russia. But China's going to get the rump state of Canada and the lower 48 for their grain production and the resources that are there as well. And Russia and China are going to basically both rule North America. They're going to divvy up North America, and they're going to rule North America between the two of them. They don't give a rat's ass about the West, its elites, or what the Western elites want. They see them as rivals that need to be destroyed. And even though the Western elites have ripped their own power bases apart, China and Russia are going to come in to finish them off. They're going to come in, they're going to take them, and they're going to humiliate them, and they're going to become Xi Jinping's footstool back in the palace, back in his presidential palace. When he's sitting on that red and gold throne that I showed you all that picture of before, when he's sitting on his throne, he's going to be using a Rockefeller or a Rothschild or one of those, or maybe even Klaus Schwab or one of them. He's going to use them as his personal footstool, while the rest are in Chi-Com concentration camps, breaking big rocks to small rocks to build him a new pagoda or whatever he wants them to build, or sewing tennis shoes or whatever he has them doing. That's what they're going to be doing. And because the Chinese don't give a rat's ass about the West or its elites. Yeah, sure, they've done business deals with them in the past. They've even taken advantage of them, like how the Chinese pretended to play nice with us so that they could get concessions from us. But all the while, all they were doing was milking us. They were milking us of everything we had so that one day they could do what they're about to do to us, where they can skull F us, if you know what I mean by skull F us. That's exactly what they're going to do to us. They're gonna rape this country. They're going to rape this nation, and they're going to take its people as slaves and genocide the rest. And they're going to resettle the land with Chinese. And they're going to be the, as Wei Fang called it in China when he was giving his speech to the CCP regime Politburo. He said that they're going to replace Americans with Chinese and make the Chinese, quote unquote, good Americans. And that was his little sick joke at insinuating that they were going to enslave and murder and genocide the American people and replace them with Chinese colonists. So the little Western Great Reset is not going to happen. It's never going to happen. What's going to happen instead is the West isn't even mentioned in the end times. The West is not mentioned. The North is mentioned. The East is mentioned a lot. And you have the South mentioned a couple times. But you never have the West mentioned. But Babylon's mentioned because it gets destroyed, because it's invaded and conquered and occupied by the East and the Eastern elites. So there is no great reset in the end times. People, it is so hard for the Western mind to comprehend that the Western elites are going to be gone, that they're going to be a sacrifice for the true New World Order, which is going to be an Eastern-centric system. It is so hard for the Western mind to comprehend that, but we're not there. We are not there in the end times. We are eliminated, taken over and colonized by the Red Chinese and the Russians. who are the two most powerful kings of the 10 kings, who the beast and his false prophet flatter to attain their power and unify them to have their one world regime. But you have to understand, the elites were never unified. They're not even unified during the one world system because they only reign with the beast for 1 hour. That's the longest he can hold them together. That's the longest the elites are held together, even the Eastern elites who end up fighting amongst themselves. They're held together for 1 hour in biblical time, which is just a matter of months, because we know if a day equals a year, like in Daniel's 70th week, each day is a year, an hour, that's just a matter of months before it all falls apart and they all start infighting. Sure, a couple might stay loyal to the beast, but they're all going to end up infighting. And the one world system, as it were, will not last. It will not last. It will not last. So when they realize, that they finally are able to be unified for a very short time, what's going to happen is that because Satan cannot help himself, and remember, Satan is all about sin. And sin, there's a sin called greed and another sin called pride. Greed and pride and lust for power always leads to infighting. It always leads to infighting. That's why the Western elites are not even fully unified. None of them are unified. Some of them have similar goals, but they're not unified. They are not a unified front, and they never were, and they never will be, because they each and every one of them lusts for power for themselves. They're not content with what they have. They're not content to sit there and be like, well, yeah, I got this wealth, I got this mansion, I got this and that. I'm good, I'm satisfied. No, they always want more. They want more and more and more. Then why do you think you see the atrocities happening, like what happens to youngsters and what they do with drinking their blood? It's because they're greedy. They're not ever content with having simple things. They always have to have more and more and more. And then it gets to the point to where they're doing nasty, disgusting rituals and other things because they're never satisfied with what they've already had. And then they feel they need to do more and more and more rituals to get more and more power. And they backstab each other. That's how these elites operate. So they're only really, truly ever unified for one single cause when they give the beast their power so that he can have his one world government for 1 hour. They reign together for 1 hour with the beast. And then it all falls apart. And then the wrath of God also comes down as that's falling apart too, as they're infighting with each other. So it never ends. Satan always eats his own. It never stops because they are all sinners. They're all greedy. They're all full of pride and lust. And sometimes pride leads people to do stupid shit. Like the Western elites are incredibly stupid, prideful, arrogant, hubristic people that their plans were made to fail the moment that they conceived of them. Their Great Reset would fail anyway. Even if the Chinese and Russians didn't invade, it would fail. And I'll tell you why it would fail. Because when you tear your own power base down and turn it into the Flintstones, and you have individual people with their own ideas, their own ideologies, their own goals and objectives, then you end up with a situation like a Syrian-style internal conflict where everybody turns against the elites and their now weak, pathetic regime because they gutted its own military capabilities and everything else. Then you have every factions turning against them. And they all begin to jockey for power, and they have their own plans, their own goals. They're not all unified. You know what I'm saying? Like, people have the goofiest misconceptions about things. Like, they believe in the goofiest distortions and misconceptions and everything else without even ever looking at things objectively. And by objectively, that means established truths and facts. People do not ever look at things objectively. They just look at things subjectively and think about everything they see based on subjective truths, which aren't truths at all. They're just individual people's beliefs. Objective truth is established truth. and facts. So you can look at things subjectively, which is based on your own opinions, what you hold to be a truth, or you can look at things objectively and look at what you know is a set in stone, irrefutable truth. And, I try to do that to the absolute best of my abilities, like why I get on here all the time. And I talk on and on and on and on about objective truths, and I make entire scenarios that are based off of objective truths, things that could happen because of objective truths that are well established in our world. I'm not saying that the hypotheticals will happen exactly the way I concocted them in my mind, but what I concocted in my mind is 100% it's based on objective truth. So if I can concoct something that's based on objective truths that exist in our world, that are real, that are really there, if I can concoct things that are based on objective truths, then if I can create a reality based off of objective truths that's hypothetical, it's hypothetical, but does that not mean then that if I could come up with something based on objective truths, does that not mean then that something in our realistic world that could happen just like that or very similar to that? Of course it means that. Of course it means that. So if I created something that I based entirely on stats and facts and figures and established facts that cannot be refuted, and I created my own factions, my own goals for those factions, objectives, does that not mean then that those types of people couldn't exist in our real world? Of course they could. Of course they could exist in our real world. It's very naive. It's extremely naive thinking and beliefs to think that people that don't have some sort of crazy ultra-nationalist ideology that could lead them to become warped in their thinking and methods. It's crazy to believe that there are not ultra-nationalists in this country that could become secular humanists that could end up taking it to a really crazy direction and then using it to mass murder as many as they could. It's crazy to think that that couldn't happen. It's also crazy to think that that there might not be some fringe sect of some cultish type of religion or organization that wouldn't take control of the mainstream of it. That's crazy to think that that couldn't happen too. Of course that could happen. Of course. Then you end up with groups like the Mormon State, Also, you also have to, hold on. There, I got rid of the bot. Oh, wait. Did I? There, I hid the bot, everybody. All right, anyways, it's crazy to think that those things can't happen, that those sorts of things couldn't occur, to where you could have these different factions rising up, seizing power in their own local areas with their own objectives and goals, and so on and so forth, and taking control of their own areas. It's insane to think that that couldn't happen, because it's very naive to think that there's not people lurking in the shadows that have their own plans, their own goals, their own ideologies. This is a country of its vast size and population, and being it's in the middle of a population that's extremely well armed. I mean, it's naive to think that there's not people lurking in the shadows, plotting and planning in the utmost secret. I mean, in the utmost secrecy. Like, that's how you ended up with groups in the 70s, like the Weather Underground. They were their own faction. They had no real ties to anyone. Of course, the leader, Bill Ayers, he eventually gained ties with elitists down the road. But during the 70s, when he created his group, his own faction, he had no ties to elitists, until he went to prison. So after that, that's when he gained ties to the uber rich, who he ended up becoming best friends with one of their puppets who pardoned him and let him out of prison, but he never should have been. But you end up with groups like the Weather Underground. That's a secret group that was plotting in secret. They were even responsible for a string of certain types of attacks. You can go read about them. You can read all about that. So if they could do that in the 70s, it's naive to think that there's not people in more turbulent times, like right now, doing the very same things with their own goals and their own objectives, their own abilities to disseminate their own propaganda for their groups, to grow their groups, that have ham radio operators that can spread their ideologies, or they have pirate radio stations that can spread their ideologies, propaganda networks to spread it. It's naive to think that that can't happen. So what I'm saying is that I said all that to say this. The exact way that I had it happen in my hypothetical is precisely an exact sort of way it could happen in our real life world too. And that's how it happened in other nations, like in Syria. How do you think all these groups just came out in the midst of rioting and built their own little armies in the background? That happened in the Syrian civil war too. They had their own factions, build their own private little armies, and then they started to take territory during the Syrian civil war. All of that was happening with rioting and civil unrest going on in the background. It's happened in almost every major revolution too, like the Russian Revolution. There were different factions. And then you had the civil war between the whites and the reds, and there were even neutral groups in that civil war. I've read all about it. There were neutral groups too that had nothing to do with any of the other sides, with neither the white or the red sides, the communists. They had nothing to do with them. There was like a green faction. So you have multifaceted internal conflicts. It's not just something that is like cut and dry, or that it's something where it's like literally like two factions. You can have multifactional conflicts. Most modern internal conflicts are that type of conflict where you have multiple factions all fighting for different things. So if it happened in Syria, if it happened in Afghanistan or in Congo or anywhere else or Iraq, where I've been to, if it's happened, and there's a lot of different militias in Iraq, lots of different types of militias. You had the al-Sadr militia in Baghdad and Sadr City. You had all the militias that were up in Diyala province where we were. You had different militias up in Mosul. You even had ISIS come into Iraq after we left. You had all of that stuff happening. So if these multi-factional, multi-sided, multi-way conflicts can happen in modern civil wars, then what makes America special? What makes America special? Why wouldn't it happen here too? It stands to reason that it would happen here even easier than it's happened in Syria or other places. It would stand to reason that that's the case. And that's why I made a hypothetical scenario based off of objective facts and truths and things that have even happened in our real world. So if it happened anywhere else, and there's a past precedent of those sorts of things happening, then who's to say that it's not going to happen again, or even worse here when it happens here? So that's what I'm saying about these Western elites. Their plans for a great reset were doomed. Were doomed to failure. They were utterly doomed to failure before they were even created, because they have not accounted for the laws of cause and effect. They cannot control every last single solitary person and what they do. So when you have all these little miniature strong men rising up out of nowhere with their own ideologies and objectives, when people see these little strong men with their own little groups rising up, their own little factions and their own little armies, they're going to join these types of groups. Then you're going to have a multi-factional internal conflict. Oh yeah, sure. You're going to have your little globalist-oriented areas like I had in my scenario, my hypothetical that I created. But, I mean, most areas are going to split and fracture along different lines with different strongmen, with different factions, different ideologies. It's going to happen like that. I really, really see that. So it's not something that they can control, because in a nation of 340 so odd million people, or very close to it, you cannot control what all the wild cards are going to do. And even if you only had a few million wild cards, that would be enough. That would be enough to make a huge difference. To make a huge difference as far as like different leaders emerging with their own forces, crazies that would go do certain types of things, and so on and so forth. That would be game changers in some sort of an internal scenario. So their plans were doomed to failure before they were even concocted for their little reset, they call it. But then that's just the internal stuff. I haven't even gone into the foreign invasion. When you rip your own power base apart, you castrate your own military's capabilities, you castrate your own militaries, literally and figuratively. Who is going to protect you if you're the Western elites? Who is going to protect you? Not only in some sort of an internal scenario, but who's going to protect you when you get invaded by the world superpower, China, or Russia, their best friend, the second most powerful country on earth, Russia, overall, after China? Who's going to protect them from Russia and China? Nobody. 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 Because they ripped their own power base apart. They castrated their own military forces and their own ability to defend the uber rich and the elites that they serve. They ripped apart their own militaries. They ripped apart their own supply chains, which affect the military's ability to function and run and operate like it has been. And it's started to affect the military. When the military, because look, their supplies all come from somewhere. They have factories that produce parts for their vehicles. They have factories that create munitions for them. When they ripped apart their own supply chains, they ripped their militaries apart with it. When they introduced all these woke policies, they castrated their military. They've demoralized it. They've gutted it. They've purged it of its best people. The training regimen is garbage now. They're now making it to like literally they made it to where anybody can get in now. Anyone, even people that would have never qualified before. There's no discipline. There's nothing. The whole thing is going to shit. It's falling apart. So when China and Russia invade again, who is going to protect these elites? Who's going to protect them from Xi Jinping? You tell me. Who's going to protect them from Xi Jinping? Who's going to be there to enforce their Great Reset? Nobody is going to be there to do either. So there's not going to be a Western Great Reset. There's going to be a Chinese and Russian New World Order that gets co-opted by it gets co-opted by the beast and his false prophet, who will work miracles in front of the 10 Eastern victorious kings of World War III, like the 10 kings of Revelation. They're going to be Eastern kings who were victorious in World War III, who crushed the West in World War III. The beast is going to come on the scene, and he's going to flatter them because he has no power of his own, because he attains his kingdom through flattery. He's going to convince them with the false prophet working miracles to give their power to the beast, and they will reign with him for 1 hour before it all starts to fall apart again due to greed and lust for power and control, because Satan can't help himself, because Satan eats his own. What don't people understand about that? What don't people understand about human nature and about the nature of sin and what it causes people to do? What don't people get about that? That's an objective truth. It's in the Bible, for God's sake. I mean, literally, it's in the Bible. What don't people understand about that? I don't know. I just don't get it. Hey, Heather. Yeah, Armored Saint. Yeah, it's nasty. I try to avoid that type of stuff. I mean, it's hard to give up energy drinks, but I stay away from soda. I don't drink soda, and I definitely don't drink no Pepsi. I don't drink nothing. I don't drink Pepsi or Coke products. No Coca-Cola, no Pepsi. Well, yeah, Heather, the gangs are you saw the factions I made in my documentary. You saw that the La Raza narco state was basically just comprised of like former prison gangs and drug gangs and stuff. Well, there would be biker gangs that ended up joining the National Salvation Revolutionary Front. Gangs would just be a part of each faction. I mean, they wouldn't be like the be all end all. They would just become parts. They would become parts or parcel of the different armies that would exist on the map. So I mean, they wouldn't be like the chief fighting force. They would just become part of it. Like you might have your biker gangs that are like really pro-American ultra-nationalism. You might have them becoming like a small part of the Jolly Roger Death Brigades, who are the fanatical paramilitary elements of the NSRF, the National Salvation Revolutionary Front. You might have them becoming part of that, but they would just be part of it. They wouldn't be like the entire thing, because the rest of it would be like your most fanatical, regular, like ultra right-wing militias and other types that would like all amalgamate to form that specific fighting force. Like in that scenario, you would have all these different things. They look. Who's this? Yeah, they need to invade for the food production and the resources, lowrider. You would really like my old work that I did. I made entire hypothetical invasion scenarios all about China and Russia invading along with their allies. I mean, it's pretty much like epic. I mean, like I made some epic battles in those, but they're just hypotheticals of what hybrid warfare doctrines with real units, with real equipment, all plugged in, having a conflict within the confines of hybrid warfare doctrine. That's what it is made to simulate. And it's a hell of a good simulation because I show every single solitary aspect of Chinese and Russian hybrid war doctrines with real units, with real equipment, real everything figured into it, with the real methods that they would use in order, all in order. It's in proper order of how they would do things. It's exactly like it's written in the Chinese manuals and the Chinese books like Unrestricted Warfare, where they literally talk about what they've been working on as far as their new doctrines and how the new ways of warfare will be between the concept of the Trojan horse combined to blitzkrieg, combined with new innovative technologies. That is hybrid fourth generation warfare. It's not just going to be like blitzkrieg where there's front lines and safe areas behind the lines and it's just mobile warfare. See, second generation was trench warfare, and first generation was walking across the field either with bows and arrows or with swordsmen or with musketeers shooting muskets at each other. That was first gen warfare. Then second gen warfare was trench warfare. Third gen is blitzkrieg or mobile warfare. Then you have fourth gen, which is the blending of the Trojan horse in hybrid war with the concept of blitzkrieg, with the externals, combined with new innovative technologies. That is fourth generation, or also called hybrid warfare. That's everything blended together. So that's how they're going to invade us. That's how they're going to invade us, and the West, the entire West in general. You see, people in the West think that the next war is going to be like World War II. Like they're still stuck in that antiquated, old school World War II mindset. See, people have not thought beyond World War II. People have not, like, literally thought how things would be outside of old World War II doctrines because people are always fighting the last war in their mind. Like how the French in World War II thought that the war with the Germans would be like a trench warfare thing. They didn't understand that the Germans had a new doctrine of mobile warfare. So they weren't ready for mobile warfare. They were ready for a trench war. And you saw what happened to France. They got their asses kicked. Well, America is going to be like France in the next conflict because we think it's going to be some World War II thing where we're going to be safe, where we have two oceans to protect us, but we really don't because our enemies are already ringing this nation and they're already inside of it on CCP regime-owned properties that the Chinese CCP regime has purchased to use as staging areas for their logistics, for their ammo dumps, for their troops, for entire units of PLA, PAP, and so on and so forth, going on down the line. Russian army, too, because you know that the CCP lets their allies put troops on their properties, too. Those are staging areas. They're combat outposts. They're FOBs. They're forward operating bases inside this country. They can hide their tanks and their vehicles inside of barns and pole barns and or even underground structures that they dug and rigged up. They can do that. It's not hard for them to do that. They've owned our ports. They've owned our ports for 20 years. It's not like you're not going to have like CCP friendly transport companies that wouldn't have driven their tanks little by little over the course of 20 years all the way out to CCP properties where they would base their units at. It's not like that wouldn't have happened. I mean, you got to think outside the box. People don't think like this. People they don't understand that that there's independent truckers and trucking companies. I mean, it's not like that the Chinese CCP either didn't have allies that were friendly or sympathetic to them that would drive their military equipment out to their places for them, or they got Chinese citizens to get CDLs to drive the trucks themselves to deliver the PLAs or PAPs, which are the People Armed Police Paramilitary of China. It's not like they couldn't have gotten their own drivers to drive the Chinese vehicles or Club Ks out from the Chinese-owned ports like Long Beach and other ports. Long Beach is the biggest port in the West Coast, and the Chinese owned it for 20 years. It's not like they didn't use that to get all their equipment brought out to their CCP regime properties where they could base it and stage it, along with their troops coming in from the borders, the southern borders, the northern borders, flying in as students with student visas. There's any number of ways they got in. And they live among us in civilian clothing until it's time for them to go suit up in their uniforms and form up with their units, get their vehicles revved up and started, and roll on out of their properties and start capturing places. There's nobody that can stop it. It's going to happen. There's no way to stop something like that. It's far too late. Once your enemy is inside your country, it's too late. It's too late. You can't stop it. You cannot stop it. It's not like American people walk around with surface-to-air rockets every day or anti-tank rockets every day. So, like, when you see these foreign vehicles rolling down the streets, you know, who's going to literally be there to face them down? Nobody. Like I said in my last live, nobody's going to be able to stop it when it happens. It's just, I've said that in all my material. And I've even showed people how that looks and how it works mechanically, from a mechanical standpoint. I've shown that in all my documentaries. I've shown that in the stories I wrote in my community tab. I've shown it time and time and time and time again, how all of this works with real units, real equipment, real everything. So, oh my God, it's like people don't learn it. I feel like people aren't grasping it. Like that is what it looks like. That is how it works. That is how it works. And I'm not saying that against anybody in this chat. I'm just saying in general, people just don't grasp the concept that this could happen, that it is going to happen. It's beyond the point where it could happen, because that is going to happen, because that's what it says in the Chinese own manuals and books that they write. That is how they're going to do it. And they've shown that they're intending on doing it by buying our ports, by buying all the properties they've bought, by having all these foreign guests, workers, and students with student visas. And you know, to get an exit visa from communist China, you have to have had prior PLA or paramilitary training to be able to get an exit visa from China. So all the Chinese students here were former PLA or current PLA. And I would place wagers on it being the latter, being that they're current PLA or PAP or National Militia, which is like their paramilitary National Guard, or Marine Militia or whatever. But they're here, and they're here in the millions. So who is going to stop it? Nobody can stop it. It's too late. once they've already bought properties and owned ports and gotten millions of their people in. You cannot stop them from taking this country over. All that could be done, maybe, is that if people don't end up having an internal conflict and butchering each other, like I've made a scenario for that too. If that doesn't happen, and it's a best case for us, and we get invaded and conquered, the best thing you could ever hope for is a very, very, very long and drawn out type of sort of a guerrilla conflict against the occupation. That's the best you can hope for. And that's not even a guarantee that that would even go well for us. But that's the best you could ever hope for. We're at the point where this nation is living on borrowed time. It's basically already dead and gone, but it's chugging along on borrowed time. We're just waiting for the inevitable to happen. So that's why I put out the material I put out to educate people, to get them ready to live in those conditions, to get them ready to navigate those conditions. It's like I feel like people are not getting why I even do this. I want people to survive this stuff because so many are not going to survive it because they're not ready for it at all. They haven't. It's not even crossed their mind as a possibility that these things could happen. They're not ready for it. It's a guarantee they're going to happen. It's a guarantee they're going to happen. But what I'm saying is that it hasn't even crossed their mind that it's a possibility. People don't even understand that that's beyond possible and that it's actually literally happening and has happened for 20 or so odd years since they've bought properties and owned the ports. People don't get it. They do not get the extent of the buildup. That's like the equivalent of 20 desert storms inside this country. 20 desert shields, rather. I'm sorry, that was the buildup period. 20 desert shields. So over the course of 20 years, multiply about 500,000 times 20. And, you know, that's your rough estimate of how many troops that they've got inside and around the place. But a few more years have gone by, so naturally it's going to be even more now. So, yeah, that's but just inside the country, as far as Trojans, that's at least 5 million. That's at the bare minimum, 5 million Trojans inside this country. Inside. That's a bare minimum. Bare minimum. So you're looking at that. You're looking at all these foreign troops inside. There is not going to be a Western Great Reset. The West is going to be destroyed, and its elites will be destroyed along with it. And there's nothing they can do about it either. It's too late for them. They've already castrated and broke down their own nations. Not just here, but in Europe also. The West is over. The future is not going to be high-tech. There's not going to be some high-tech fourth industrial revolution. You know what it's going to be? It's going to be the Flintstones here. All the high-tech stuff is going to be in the East. The East is going to be high-tech, where all the ghost cities are and everything else. And China and Russia. That's where all the high-tech stuff's going to be in the end times. The West is going to be like the Flintstones. It's going to be occupied by foreign troops. There's going to be a long-running, counterinsurgency type of operation done by them against the people there once they've taken firm control. And it's going to be like the Flintstones. You ain't going to have no electric outside of what you can create on your own. You know, you're not going to have no grid, no water. You're going to have to learn how to be nomadic and live in the freaking woods, man, because it's not going to be high tech here. Everything you've known, all the human settlements you've known, kiss them all goodbye, because the Chinese over time are going to make this place a desolate wasteland. They're going to shell and rocket and drop munitions from the air and fire missiles and missile and rocket everything into oblivion. Every human settlement you've ever known is going to be a heaping pile of rubble. That's all it's going to be. So I hate delivering news like that, but that's why I do the work I do on this channel. So again, there's very, very important things going on in the world, and I have little to no time for anything else outside of that, outside of the work I'm here to do. So that's why I've said what I've said earlier. Oh yeah, Armored Saint. Afghanistan, you might as well call it Ameristan here, because it's going to be like that here too. It's going to be like that, and then some, and then some. It's going to be even worse. I'm just going to read some of these before I get off here. I have a little bit more power, so I'm going to start interacting a little bit with people. Okie, they're not going to have much to eat. Those types of people are going to be goners unless they can live off their fat. Well, Heather, they're not. The Antichrist isn't going to give them an out. I mean, the West is going to be destroyed either way by then. The Antichrist is just going to come in and do like a bogus sort of a peace treaty to end the war, but that's not going to give them an out. It's still going to be bad here. It just means that the war, though the actual like heavy carpet munitioning might end, that doesn't mean that the counterinsurgency against the people here will end, because they're still going to persecute the people, because the Chinese are still going to end up occupying this place. Same with the Russians, wherever they occupy at. They're still going to occupy this place. It's not like they're going to go home and go back to China. No, China and Russia just took what they've always ever wanted. They took what they ever wanted. They got their piece of the pie. China got America's food production, and Russia got the resources in the Arctic and got Alaska back. They're not going to give that up for the beast. That's why the beast has to come and flatter them, because China and Russia and their allies, the other 8 kings, are going to be the ones with all the power after World War III. So the beast is going to have to come and flatter them to get them to give him power for a one world government. But even when that happens, is what I'm saying, is that the West is still going to be occupied by China and Russia. They're not going to go home. They just fought the biggest invasion in all of human history to gain their gains, and they're not going to give up their gains and go home. I'm sure that's going to be part of what the beast, has to concede to them. Once he convinces them to give their power to him, he's not. I think he's going to have to make concessions, because they are the ones with the real power. He has to flatter them to get his power from them. So he's going to have to make concessions to China and Russia and be like, well, you fought a hard-won war to gain what you gain. You just keep what you gained, and just trust me, give your power to me. We'll build a one world government together, yippee, he's going to have to find a way to sweet talk everybody. And China and Russia aren't just going to pack up and go home after they took this place over and spent all the money and time and years that they spent to build up to capture it. They're not going to just go home, not even for the beast. The beast is going to have to give them concessions, which will mean that, he's going to have to let them keep their troops here, So, they'll give their power to the beast, but they're not going to go home for him, if that makes sense, because the 10 kings still reign with the beast, the key word being with in Revelation. So they're going to reign with the beast, but they're not going to just pack up and go home for the beast. I'm sure the beast is going to have to make concessions for China and Russia, being that they're the 2 most powerful countries that he's going to have to beg for power from. Well, not beg, but you know what I mean. Flatter. He's going to have to flatter them. Oh, no, not this. I see it. I have to get rid of this again. There. Yeah, hey, Lotus, what's up, man? Hey, Zach, what's up? No, after Russia and China take over, they're going to get rid of, they're going to genocide and enslave all the American people. There's not going to be Americans just, living here like they used to live here. They're going to enslave or genocide the American people. That's what China has always intended to do. I mean, I don't know, in Russian controlled territory, like when Russia takes Alaska back and far northern Canada, I don't know. Americans might have it better up there, but they might have to become like Russian citizens and learn Russian, and you're not going to be an American, because America's not even going to exist ever again. It's gone. It's over. When China takes over, though, when China gets the lower 48, they're going to genocide and enslave the American people. I think anyone who's not willing to become a slave that's an American is going to get killed, basically. That's what that means. Um, yeah, China has the biggest gold deposits on Earth. They have over 6,400 tons of gold. People have always said and maintained that they've had more than that, but that's all China will admit to having. They'll only admit to having 6,400 tons of gold. Russia has 2,000 something tons. I wrote it all down. I have a video about that, Zach, if you're interested. It has the exact figures. Our last reported figure was 800 tons. 800. And I don't even think we even have that. I think that's a lie because Fort Knox has not had any type of audits since the 70s. And then you had all that gold that got stolen on that certain day back in 2001. That's all probably in Europe that the Western elites have. But that's okay. That's all going to get taken from them when their Great Reset fails and they're captured by the Russians and Chinese. All their wealth will be stripped from them, and they'll become slaves too. They'll be humiliated. They're going to lose everything they have. They're not going to be able to buy their way out of trouble because they have nowhere to go. Where are they going to go? Their entire power base is gone. They're not going to be able to buy their way out. China and Russia can just take it from them. They can just laugh at them and take it from them. Like, no, no, homie, you're giving us all your money and you're going to be a slave. You know, Klaus Schwab's going to be sewing Nikes in a Chinese Uyghur camp. Yep. People don't think about these things, rationally. Why would you to your rival, why would you allow them to just, try to buy you off and live happily ever after? No, man, if I had a rival whose power base is totally gone and eviscerated and evaporated, gone, if I had a rival who had no more power, no more chips on the table, no more way to bargain their way out of anything, I would take them. I would take everything they had from them, and I would make them. I would humiliate them in some sort of a way. That's what China and Russia are going to do to these Western elites. Yeah, that too, Armored Saint. But I think that they would revel in the ability to humiliate them first. I think that they're going to enslave them, and I think they're going to have a miserable short rest of their lives in China. I think that Xi Jinping probably would use a few of them as a footstool, like on a rotational basis, just to humiliate them when he's on his little gold and red throne. Xi Jinping's definitely some sort of a principality. For him to rule the world superpower, the most powerful nation on earth, he is some sort of a principality. He's a very powerful one. He rules the dragon country. Think about it. And even the Bible says, the dragon gave his power unto the beast. Well, that could mean every bit as much as the Satan giving his power to the beast. It could mean China also gave his power to the beast, since China's the world's superpower. If China gives his power to the beast can't be beaten by any other country on the map. If China endorses him, if Xi Jinping endorses him, who knows? Xi Jinping might be Satan incarnate. He might be. He rules the dragon country, the most powerful country on earth. Everybody in China looks at him like he's God because it's a secular humanist regime, and the state, i.e. the CCP, is God in China. So think about that one. That one's when I really get into thinking about that and really like it swirls around in my mind, all these possibilities begin to enter my mind, and I'm like, wow, it sort of like blows me away. But yeah, anybody else got anything to say before I get going here? Yeah, okay. I don't know about all that stuff. I don't get into all that because I really, I don't know how that's going to work. All I know is that the Antichrist is going to go in there and save them from getting annihilated, because that's why they're going to see him as their God. The Jews don't have no power. I mean, not they won't after the West is gone. So that's why do you think all the Eastern victorious 10 kings are about to invade Israel and the Antichrist makes a covenant? It's to save Israel from being butchered by the East. That's why he goes in there and makes a covenant with the Hebrews, because he is protecting them. He's their protector. Because with America and the West destroyed in World War III, the East is about to turn on Israel when the Antichrist shows up and makes a covenant to protect them. Well, or else why would he even do that? He's trying to save them so that they'll turn to him and look at him as their savior and not Yeshua. But they turn and finally accept Yeshua when the beast breaks his covenant and allows all the other Eastern nations to destroy Israel, and that's when they finally turn to Yeshua and accept him. Think about it. Think about it. All of that begins to make a lot of sense when you really see how these things are developing. You're worried about what? World games? What's that? Soccer? Or I'm not familiar. Well, Zach, it's okay if you're defending yourself. You absolutely should defend yourself, but you should be very smart about how you do it. You don't want to just run and be a coward. You have to protect the weak and you have to defend yourself, but you got to be smart how you do it, if that makes sense. You got to be really, really smart how you do it. You would really like my playlist, Zach. It's called Community Tab Review Stories. It's for the stories I wrote in the community tab. It's an actual playlist called Community Tab Story Review Playlist. And that talks about a lot of different things in the stories. It shows how people did fight back versus when it was safe for them to do so versus when it wasn't. It shows tactics that were used by both sides, everything. Talks about being nomads and semi-nomadism. It talks about how they avoided the Chi-Coms when it was time to do that versus how they fought back when it was time to do that. There's a time and place for everything, Zach, basically. You just got to use your brain. You got to use your mind and discernment to see when it's safe to actually, run or when it's safe to defend yourself. There's a time and place for all of it, basically. Sometimes if you haven't been discovered by the enemy, sometimes it's best just to sit and chill and not do anything. But if you have been discovered, sometimes that's when you fight back. You know what I'm saying? Like, you got to use your brain. You got to be able to gather intel, and you got to know how to use your intel that you gather as far as knowing where the enemy is, what they're doing, like a salute report, basically. They call it a salute report in the Army. You're gathering intelligence on the enemy and all that. Like the strength and size of them. Yeah, Club Ks, Heather. Club Ks are the calibers. Yeah, the 4 calibers per launcher. Yeah, the Chinese and Russians both produce those Club K systems, caliber cruise missile systems. The Club Ks are all over the country, and they're going to be a big part of the invasion. Like when they invade, when it's time for the Trojan horse shock troops to come out, they're gonna start all hitting key strategic places about the time that the Trojans are beginning to just emerge and start to get on the road headed to their destinations. That's when that's all going to happen. So as they're arriving and capturing cities or installations, these things begin to hit everywhere, all over the country. Yeah, that's a big part of it, Heather. The Club Ks, absolutely. There's thousands upon thousands of those launchers inside this country by now. Yep. They're also a big part of my invasion scenarios too. Like I mentioned, that happens at the beginning of basically every battle in my. See, you begin to notice the pattern when you watch those hypotheticals. You begin to see how it all begins in like a pattern. You see how X, Y, and Z begins to happen, then A, B, C happens, and D, E, F happens, so on and so forth. There's like an order to it, Every battle scenario I made has a beginning logical order to these events, as far as the hypotheticals. See, what else? I just want to make sure I get to people before I get off here. I have to press buttons to see these, so sorry about that. Yep, Heather, they're Trojan horses. Yep, Armored Saint, defensive posture, absolutely 100%. Always defend yourself, but you just got to use your head and when the time and place is. Like I said, if you're discovered, then you defend yourself. But if you're if you don't have all the intel you need about where your enemy is or what's going on with them, sometimes it's best just to sit down and chill and not react or do anything. You have to use your brain. Like, you have to know when the time to defend yourself is and when it's not. Like, you don't want to go out there and make yourself any kind of a target, you know? Sometimes you just want to sit, hold your peace, gather intel, be quiet, not make no noise or commotion, just like in the scenarios. Like the stories, rather. I mean, I'm sorry, I said scenario. Well, yeah, the scenarios, but they're the stories, like in Community tab. Like when you read those stories about how they reacted to the Chinese, you see how the people that were reactionary got slaughtered versus the people that knew they needed to evacuate first, as they didn't have the proper weapons or gear, like the proper weapons or equipment or numbers of it to take on the Chi-Coms. I mean, you're not going to be able to like take them on toe to toe. When you know it's a situation like that, then you need to get away from the battlefield, like get out of the hot zone, evacuate all the weak, the frail, the youngsters, the old, so on and so forth, and get yourself out of there too. Go somewhere, you wait, you gather intel, you wait for the enemies to get comfy and complacent, then you consider doing something. But at least at first, you want to get away from everything. You don't want to be like up in the middle of it, or you're going to get annihilated. They're in their invasion phase at that point. You don't want to, like, when they're in their invasion phase, they're coming in and hitting with everything they have. Whereas when they're in their occupation phase, they've spaced everything out. They're starting to consolidate and put things on different fobs or combat out. Like, they're not focused on like annihilating enemies at that specific moment. They're focused on policing actions like occupations. Like that's what I'm saying. Like, you have to know what's going on and when it's safe to do certain things and when it's not. You have to use you got to use your head. Like in the initial invasion, when foreign troops are bearing down on the whole country, that's not the time where you want to be like running out there, like trying to, charge enemies at your mailbox. Like, you're gonna get like ripped apart by about 1,000,000 bullets, or blasted by some kind of a missile or rocket or whatever. You're not going to last long at all. Versus when they're in their occupation phase and they're sort of like settling in and building combat outposts, and they're setting things up after they've already taken over. That's when you start considering that type of stuff. See, what else? What else? Uh, well, yeah, yeah. Angelia, I've got a lot of older stuff about that. Yes, yes, most definitely, most definitely. They are sending a lot of stuff there, because they're using Ukraine as a proxy, but because of our weakening of our country and our supply chain and our factories and our gutting of our military, when we're sending stuff over there and it's getting destroyed by a tiny quantity of Russian troops. They didn't send that many troops in there, Angelia. They really didn't. The Russians, despite what the propaganda says about that's coming out of the West, the Russians are doing insanely well, and they've used a tiny amount of troops to do it. They're even locally outnumbered. By that I mean inside of Ukraine itself. They're locally outnumbered in the borders of Ukraine by Ukrainians, but they've crushed and ground the Ukrainians down to the nub, being outnumbered 10-1 doing it with their limited incursion. It's not a full-on invasion. It's only a limited incursion where the Russians send in a very tiny force and it's ground a numerically superior force, which is the Ukrainian forces, down to the nub. All that's left is old men and some Western weapons that are being sent there, because all the heavy weapons they had at the beginning of the conflict, which they had a pretty sizable amount of weapons, Russia annihilated it all, ground it down, which is why it's been taking so long, because they sent in a small force. They sent in a small force against a numerically bigger force, and they've achieved an insanely phenomenal feat with a tiny, limited incursion of some 70 battalions that are outnumbered 10-1 by 650,000 Ukrainian forces, paramilitary reserve, active military of Ukraine, against their 65,000 or so, 70 battalions worth of troops. That's not very big. So they're winning, though. They're still winning. Russia is winning against Ukraine. And us sending Ukraine all this stuff is weakening us because we cannot easily replace it. Our military industrial complex is in shambles. Our supply chains are in shambles. It affects our military. Our military is in shambles too. It's the woke, depleted, sissified, poorly led military, and it's in shambles and it's total garbage. And China and Russia, when they invade, are not going to have a hard time at all crushing it into the dust. You know, it might even be already crushed into the dust before then when a scenario like the one I just completed in my playlists, it's my newest playlist called the Internal Conflict Playlist. If something like that even happens at first, China and Russia can basically just walk in and plant their flag because there'll be nothing left at all from anyone. But yeah, good. You know, I like to answer questions. Battery's getting low, but I can do a few more. Um, yeah, they're not going to be able. I don't think they're going to be able to draft anybody Armored Saint. I really don't. I don't think it's going to ever come to that. Yeah, they're considering it, but they say a lot of things. You got to remember that they use a lot of fear and agitation propaganda due to Smith Month being, gone. So, they say stuff just to rile people up or to agitate. You know, Why does the IRS have so much ammo? Well, because they're going to be used as paramilitary forces, like in my scenario. They're going to be amalgamated into those types of forces called like the national security forces, like I made in my hypothetical internal conflict scenario. That's why they have all that. You know, they're all gonna do that one day. I can see them doing that, where they just make it into one single thing. You know, Doopsie Daisy, howdy. Yeah, they're going to amalgamate them all into just a single thing one day. I can totally see that happening. Yeah, um, yeah, the Western elites are useful idiots. They're stupid. They're going to get sacrificed. I see that, wild animus. Yeah, they're going to get sacrificed so that the real beast system can be built, which is the Eastern centric one world order. It'll be an Eastern system led by the likes of China, Russia, and the other 8 kings of the 10 kings, which the beast will flatter to create their one world government, the true one world government, not the Great Reset. Everyone's so focused on the Great Reset. It's just another case of look at the left hand while you're ignoring the right hand. Who cares what the Western elites are doing at this point? It's not going to amount to anything. I mean, they're playing their little silly games and their Great Reset grab ass games and their other stuff, but it's never going to amount to anything for all the reasons I've said throughout this whole video, and then some that I've said in basically all my work in the past. You can go back to all my live streams. Every single solitary live stream I've done since I began to live stream has everything you could ever need to know about all that. Everything. And why that's the case. And why it's the case. Based on objective facts that cannot be refuted, that are actually objective, solid facts. You cannot say that there is going to be a great reset. It's going to fail. I can say that because I know that's the case, because they're depleting their power bases. They have nothing to enforce anything they're trying to do. And the Chinese and Russians have built up. China has surpassed us and became the world superpower. Even Russia surpassed us. Russia and China are the number one and number two countries in the world. China's the number one superpower. Russia's the second. And we aren't even, I wouldn't even say we're even third. I'd say we're like fourth. I'd say we've been surpassed by the likes of India. India produces more steel and military stuff than we can even at this point. India has a bigger armed forces than we do at this point. We've been surpassed by several people. It's not like we're like a regional power at best. We're a regional power. We are not. We're like they might. There's still people out there who think we're a superpower, but we're really not. We're only nominally a superpower. But if you look at our funny money backed economy, you looked at the amount of military factories we actually have versus what China has or Russia, you look at our size of our military, how depleted and in shambles it is. It's a weak military. Like, we're a hollowed out country. This country is hollowed out. It's a hollowed out country with no oomph left in it. It's got nothing left in the gas tank. This country's running on fumes, literally and figuratively. Literally, because our strategic reserves being depleted, but it's literally it's figuratively too, because our military's gone down the drain. It's castrated, neutered. Our economy is built on funny money. It's a total joke. All they have to do to pull the pillars out from it is dump the petrodollar around the world, and we're nothing. We're nothing. We're every bit as much of a third world state as any other. As some country in the Middle East or Africa or wherever. Pick somewhere. Once that happens, this place is over. Like I said, we're on borrowed time, and if people can't see that we're on borrowed time, then I don't know what to tell them. I mean, because all of these things are established solid facts that I'm bringing up here. It's not like they can be refuted. So yeah, that we're on borrowed time. We're about to be destroyed. Whether that's through our collapse and internal conflict, then a foreign invasion, or through a collapse and an immediate foreign invasion. Either way, we're destroyed. China's austere, and because of their austerity, they're not charging in here immediately. Though they could easily. China could easily crush us in a matter of days if they invaded now, like they did in my scenarios where it's a best case, and we didn't have an internal conflict, and we didn't have a humongous collapse. We just had some bad economics issues like we are right now, and China invaded in the state we're in now. China will crush us in like 4 days, but in reality, they're likely, because they're austere, because they're very austere. Austerity means that they're really frugal with how they do things, with how they commit things and how they do things, and because of the austere mindset of the Eastern elites and of China, they're going to wait until we have gotten as weak as we feasibly could before they just come in here, before they come stomping in here and crushing us, because China wants it so easy that they really don't have to do really any work for it, versus like, if they did it right now, it would be a little bit more work for them. Yeah, they would crush us, but it would still be a little bit more work. They would have to spend a little more money. They'd have to do a little bit more than they would if they just waited for us to just collapse and, rip ourselves apart. It would be even easier. They'd have to spend less money. They'd have to commit less forces. You know what I'm saying. You understand exactly what I mean. They're very austere in their mindset. Yes, they could crush us immediately right now, but it's all an issue of money. And isn't everything? If you're the Chinese leadership, are you going to want to lose about 10,000 troops, or do you want to lose 500 troops? As far, I'm just using, I'm just BSing with the figure. I mean, let's say literally they only lose 50,000 troops in an invasion, which is very, very light to invade a country this vast, that's this armed. To lose 50,000 troops, say you had 30,000 dead and 20,000 wounded. That's your casualties, 50,000. Let's say you have 50,000 troops lost. You lose 30,000 dead and you have 20,000 wounded. If you're China, would you rather lose 50,000, or would you rather lose, 10,000 dead and only, I don't know, 5,000 wounded, 15,000 total? Would you rather lose 50,000 or 15,000? That's what I'm saying here. To seize a country this vast and this populated, this well-armed, do you want to lose 50,000 or 15,000? If I'm China, obviously, if it can be done, I'm going to opt for the 15,000, and it can be done. All they have to do is wait for us to collapse and start to wipe each other out, and they'll have an even easier time squashing us and crushing us into the dustbin of history. This nation will not exist. Even if they invaded now, they would still crush us in a matter of days, but what I'm saying is they would have a little bit more casualties and have to spend a little bit more money than they would otherwise. China is austere in their thinking and their mindset. So is Russia, really, but Russia especially. You should see how amazing Russia is with their budgeting. Russia's budget. Russians are the most fiscally responsible people on the planet right now. Russia has almost no foreign debt compared to the rest of the world. Russia has 150 to 200 billion as their foreign debt. We have trillions, trillions. They have 150 to 200 billion as their foreign debt. That's it. That's all. That's it. They have trade and budget surpluses in Russia. China has, a decent amount of debt, but they're still pretty damn austere. Their debt is nowhere near what the debt of Western nations is. China and Russia, especially Russia, are more austere cultures and mindsets than the West. The West is a credit-based mindset. They want to spend and blow money. They're all about credit, like spending money that's not there. That's what the West is all about. It's a funny money culture and society, and we've allowed it. We've allowed ourselves to become that. So all the things that we're about to reap stems from that. So yeah, there's not going to be a great reset. No, austere as far as money, Marcy T. Austere as far as money, finances. Austerity is a financial term every bit as much as it can be a moral term. You need to go look in the dictionary about financial austerity. That's a financial term every bit as much as it's as it is a moral term. It has relevance in finances too. You can commonly see it being used in terms of finances. Austerity can apply to other aspects too. It's not just like a moral or a financial thing. Austerity just means to be frugal in general. It's actually a synonym of that word. So, yeah, I just thought I'd say that. I saw your comment, Marcy. No, it's more than just a moral term. It's a financial, or it can be a term related to just being frugal with items or anything in general. Austerity just means to have that as a mindset, to be very very withholding as far as like how you want to spend things or use things. Yeah, that's a good way to put it there, to explain it. Not this shit again. This fucking. Oh, sorry for cursing. This damn bot. Hide this shit here. Yeah, TNT. North Korea could surpass us, probably. Yeah, it's a joke. We're a joke. All right, y'all. Well, if there's nothing else, I'm just gonna get off here anyway. Okay, thank you, Marcy. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and get off here. It's about to die on me. Hey, I'm glad y'all joined me this morning. Thank you. But yeah, my channel, before I go again, I'm gonna say it. It's strictly business here. I don't want to hear any of this, anything about anything aside from the subject matter that's covered here, or topics, or anything relating to it. Anything between people or other stuff. I don't want to be dragged into it. Don't make it my business, because I don't want it any part of my business, or else I'll start blocking people. And I mean that. I'm not about none of that. I don't care about it. I'm strictly business here, and I'd like it to stay that way. So I love everybody. Thanks to everybody who came. Y'all be blessed.